Russian? Are the police saying he's Russian? Or are they saying the Russians are out to get him? Or that he's working for Russia? He has so many questions, and nobody's answering them. They hold him there at the airport for another 5 hours. It's now 11 p.m. at night.
They forced me to stand up, and they put handcuffs behind my back, and then they took away all my things from me. I said that I wanted to talk to a lawyer, and they said no. I said that I wanted to talk to a person in my family, and they said no. And these two are basic rights in Ecuador. And then basically what ended up happening was they put me against the wall, and then I had to stand with the wall, like looking at the wall for about 20 minutes. And I don't know what they were doing during this time period. But then finally they went to the door, and at the door was a person reading from a paper. Later, I've been told that this person was trying to read in English, but I had no idea what the person was saying because the pronunciation was so terrible. I had no idea what they were saying. And this happened 3 times with 3 different people. And afterwards I found out, they were trying to read my rights, but they didn't have a translator. So they couldn't make use of a translator to actually make sure that I understood. And then they tried to force me to sign this paper, which I didn't do. And then they took me out to a cop car. They put me in the back of this cop car, and we sat on this dark parking space outside of the airport, and there was no one around. And these 2 cops were inside of the car, and we sat there for 3 hours in the middle of the night.
Sitting in a parked cop car for hours through the night? Man, all this sounds highly unusual. I can't imagine that this is how arrests normally happen in Ecuador, where unidentified people come and they keep you in a room for 8 hours, then they put you in a car to hold you there all night, and the whole time you never know why you're being detained, and they don't even ask you questions to make sure that they've got the right person. They didn't even bring his luggage with him. And he didn't know it, but his lawyer did show up at the airport, and he was trying to see Ola, but they were telling his lawyer that he didn't have a right to a lawyer, which is false. Ecuador law says you are allowed immediate access to a lawyer when you are arrested. In fact, they're even supposed to tell you that you have a right to a lawyer while being arrested. And they were telling both Ola and his lawyer that he didn't have a right to a lawyer. It just seems incredibly strange. If he's arrested, then arrest him and take him to jail and tell him what he did wrong. What's with all this waiting around and no explanation and violating his rights in so many different ways? I mean, how would you hold up? Sitting in the back of a cop car in a dark parking garage, waiting quietly in the dark all night?
I started getting really scared. Before I was like more confused, but at this point I was really scared because no one knew where I was. The lawyers had never showed up, and I was sitting here in the darkness and no one was around. And I was wondering that because Ecuador has a history of police disappearing people, there's been some famous cases that I knew about. And at that point I was thinking that, okay, this is the time when I disappear, when I get thrown into a ditch somewhere, and no one will ever find out what happened.
So you stayed all night in the back of a car?
No, only until 3 or 4 in the morning.
Okay, but I just don't understand what the other person in the car was doing the whole time. Were they just staring out the window waiting?
They were just sitting there. Yeah, they were just
What a
sitting
boring job. Whatever
yeah.
they were doing is just so boring.
Yeah, I mean, I think at some point they went out and they were talking a little bit, but then they came back and they were sitting there and they didn't have any radio on, nothing. They weren't doing anything with their mobile phones, and absolutely nothing. Wow. So yeah, definitely not a very interesting job I can imagine. But finally, in the middle of the night, around 2:30 or 3 in the middle of the night, they drove me away from the airport and we started driving. And at this point, I wasn't sure if we were driving to my death or driving to somewhere else. After a while, we ended up at my apartment building. I live on the 4th floor in an apartment building in the city of Quito. And we came there and I could see that there was a bunch of, in Ecuador, we have what we call Robocops. And these are the riot cops. They're dressed all in black and they have masks and weapons, and they look a little bit like Robocop. So there was a bunch of these Robocops outside of my apartment building and other people going in and out. And at some point, someone came up to me in the car and I was sitting there and they showed me a paper, which I didn't understand, and asked me in bad English if I would like to be helpful and allow them into my apartment.
Helpful? How about some equal respect here? If you can arrange to have 10 cops come to the apartment, then you can arrange to have an English translator show up and explain to him what's going on. If you can't give him the courtesy to let him know why he's being arrested, then why should he be helpful to you? Anyway, he refused to let them into his apartment, and he demanded his lawyer again. So at 3 a.m., he was sitting in a cop car in front of his apartment for another 30 minutes while the police were talking about what they're going to do. He wasn't going to let them in the apartment, so they decided to take him somewhere else. Little did he know, as soon as they drove him away, they just broke into his apartment and seized a bunch of stuff.
And then they drove me to another place, which was some kind of office environment where several of the cops were working. And basically I sat there for 3 hours just without any knowledge, no information, no nothing. At some point in the night, around 5 in the morning, my luggage had arrived to this office and they were going through the luggage, but they weren't doing it in front of me. They didn't ask me to verify anything or anything else that I would expect. And then a few minutes before 6 in the morning, one of the people turned on a TV that was sitting on the wall. And at that point, I still didn't understand what was going on. But on the TV, they started showing a news show that was showing images of me, including an image of me from the evening before. And I could see the word hacker, I could see the word Russo, which means Russian, and a few other things. And they'd clearly been taking pictures from my Twitter and from previous kind of speaking engagements where I've been publicly giving talks and stuff like that. So at that point, I understood that this had something to do with computers, but I still didn't know what they were accusing me of or what was actually happening.
What? It appeared that Ola Bini was being arrested because they thought he was a Russian hacker? This isn't right. Ola is Swedish, not Russian, not affiliated with Russia at all. And he's not a hacker or a criminal. He's the president of a nonprofit who works on privacy tools. He's a programmer. This is all very strange. And God, how could the police tell the media what's going on before even telling him what's going on? It must be so frustrating to find out why you're being arrested by turning on the TV and discovering why. So now it's 6 a.m. and he hasn't slept all night.
No, God, no. I mean, the first half of the night, I was afraid for my life. And then like when I came to this office, I was just exhausted, but I was so confused and didn't know what was going to happen. And at this point still, I had not been able to talk to anyone. No one knew where I was.
They keep him in this office for a total of 4 hours. Then they put him in the back of a cop car and drive him to a jail. Well, it's more like a temporary holding cell. They take him out of the car and walk him into the building.
And when I came in there, I had the relief of seeing my friend, who I also work with, Sarah, and one of my lawyers that were there waiting for me. But they were not allowed to speak to me, and the cops took me directly into the holding cells. In the holding cells, once again, they tried to force me into signing papers that I didn't really understand. They said that this was to acknowledge that I had known my rights, but since I didn't know my rights, and clearly they weren't really respecting my rights, I didn't sign it. And then they basically threw me into these holding cells, which are basically 3 big cement holes with a big door and space for maybe 12 or 15 people. And I was sitting there with like maybe 10 people. And this was in the morning, night between Thursday and Friday. So all of these people that had been caught out on parties or for small drug charges or things like that, everyone speaking Spanish, and I had no idea what they were saying.
So he sat in this jail. He called it a dungeon, still not sleeping, and hours passed by there. Eventually, to his surprise, the Swedish consular shows up. See, in Ecuador, if a foreigner is arrested, the police have to immediately notify the foreign embassy, which the Ecuadorian police didn't do right away. It wasn't until the next day that they notified the Swedish embassy, which I think should have been a pretty big clue to the police that they're not dealing with a Russian, they're dealing with a Swedish man. I mean, can you imagine calling the Swedish embassy and say, hello, we've arrested a Russian hacker? So this Swedish consular came to the jail to see what's going on.
I finally got to talk to him. He didn't really know what was going on. And then finally, a criminal lawyer showed up. And because the other lawyer I got to see was a corporate lawyer because we didn't have any criminal lawyers. We didn't know that we needed criminal lawyers. So finally, at 10 or 11, I got to speak to a criminal lawyer that was assigned to my case. And his name is Carlos Soria. And he told me that we have no idea what is going on. They haven't shown him anything. And I told him the story of everything that happened, but he couldn't really tell me anything.
How frustrating. How infuriating. Back into the holding cell he goes, with no answers to anything. It's now been 24 hours since his initial arrest, and he's still absolutely clueless as to why he's arrested. And he's trying to think if there's something that he did that would have caused all this.
I was thinking about everything, and I just couldn't make sense of it.
He's now been awake for over 30 hours, tired as hell. But at 11 p.m., they take him to see the judge. Yeah, at 11 p.m. Because there's a legal requirement that he must see a judge within 24 hours of being arrested. So it had to be the middle of the night, I guess. Anyway, great, this is super. Surely he'll get some answers here. Surely he can see what evidence they have on him and what crime they're saying he did.
In Ecuador, all the proof is stored in a physical folder called expediente. That's all the evidence, and it's the prosecutors that are in charge of this expediente where all the proof is in. And my lawyers had basically gotten to see this expediente 5 minutes before going in front of the judge. So there was like, okay, how are we going to make a defense out of this? Basically, what we found out was that they had received a phone call to an anonymous tip line saying that I was one of the 2 Russians that the Minister of the Interior had mentioned earlier, and that I was escaping to the airport in order to escape from the country. So this is what they claimed was the whole reason why they arrested me. They had no other evidence. They had absolutely nothing. What they accused me of in this hearing in front of the judge was an attack against the integrity of computer systems. That's the name of the charge. But they didn't tell me which computer system, when I'd attacked it, how I had attacked it. They basically just said, okay, this is the crime you're accused of. But they didn't tell me anything else, and there was no information of anything else. And basically, my lawyer tried to show that I was a martial artist on the way to Japan in a completely legitimate reason for leaving the country, that I was a software developer, etc., etc. But at the end of this, I didn't really understand the discussion, but at the end of this, the consul turned around to me and said, okay, it looks like you're going to jail.
Well, hold on. I do want to ask a question here. The fact that they caught you as Russian, couldn't you simply say, listen, I am not Russian. You have the wrong guy. You cannot arrest me for being Russian because I'm not Russian.
That is completely true, and that's a very good point. And I forgot to tell you, but we found some documents later that basically said that the first set of documents say that I'm Russian. The next set of documents says that I'm Swiss, because in Spanish, Swedish and Swiss are very similar. So they must have gotten so confused that they first thought I was Russian, then Swiss, and then finally they got it right and found out that I was Swedish. So there are documents that show kind of this evolution of understanding through the whole story. But no, they didn't care about that at all.
So they put him back in the holding cells for the next 2 days. Then they took him to prison. I guess they thought he was a flight risk, or he would leave the country, or was going to destroy evidence. So they wanted to keep him in jail until trial could take place.
So yeah, so they took me there, and that's where I stayed for the next 68 days in prison.
Holy cow, what is happening here? I mean, Ola has done no crime whatsoever, but the police have arrested him at the airport and violated so many of his rights and put him in prison with no way out. I mean, this could have been you or me. Ola is an innocent person, but now his life is completely ruined.
Yeah, so the prison time is, when I first came there, I had this idea of prison from American television series and movies. I thought that it was going to be a little bit like that. And Ecuadorian prison is nothing like that at all. It was complete chaos. The prisoners are basically running the place. You get 2 visitors per week. The water is not drinkable, so your friends and family has to buy water on the outside and send in to you. It was a crazy situation, and I was lucky to get out of it alive because so I was there from April 13 until June 20th. And during May was a period where Ecuador started having prison riots. And the most famous example kicked off in one of the big prisons where prisoners killed other prisoners and then hacked off their heads and played soccer with their heads. And this was happening at the same time as I was in prison.
So the police raided his apartment and took a lot of his computers. They physically took them apart to try to analyze the hard drives and do forensics on them, but they were soon met with a huge problem. Ola was a privacy advocate. He encrypts his hard drives and uses throwaway operating systems and anonymous accounts and stuff like that. The police were absolutely no match to his privacy practices. They couldn't get into anything.
And the thing is, of course, I work with security, so I had encrypted hard drives everywhere, and everything was encrypted with good passwords. So they didn't get anywhere with any of that stuff. And at that point, the prosecutor, he was asking if I would be so kind to collaborate with them, because in Ecuador, you don't have to give up the password to your devices if you don't want to. You have the right to deny that. It's not like in the UK, for example, where they can force you by putting you in prison if you don't give up the password. So I said, if they tell me what they think I have done, what I'm accused of, what computer I'm supposed to have broken into.
Yeah, that's my first reaction too. They said, could you be so kind to help us?
Exactly.
And I was like, well, could you be so kind to tell me why I'm here and talk to me like a person?
Exactly. Yeah, no, that's exactly what we did.
Of course, they didn't want to share any information with him. So they were at a standstill and they couldn't get into his devices.
In the beginning of May, I was able to go in front of another court with 3 judges at this time to do the appeal. And this appeal was specifically not for the whole case, but it was an appeal for the prisión preventiva, for the imprisonment. And we had a long hearing. And in this case, it was actually quite good because a lot of people came, like a lot of media and a lot of my friends and everything. Everyone came to support me. At this point, all my family live in Sweden. But at this point, my mother and father had come and they were at the hearing and everything. So I was feeling like, okay, this has been 3 horrible weeks, but at least now I'm going to get some justice because, of course, at the next level, obviously, I'm going to get justice, or at least that's what I thought. So basically, the prosecution basically said that their case, they began by explaining everything that happened with Julian, and their explanation is that Julian was interfering in the affairs of other countries, and that's why they were throwing him out. And then they kind of jumped into this thing that I had visited Julian many times in the embassy, but they never really made the connection between anything else. And then, I kid you not, I had programming books in my home, and they used these as evidence that I was a dangerous hacker. And they were not even using like the right kinds of books for that stuff. They were just using like the basics of programming Python or like super basic books. And also, yes, I had a few books about WikiLeaks. I had a book about Stuxnet. I had a book about the Panama Papers. All of these books were literally evidence against me. They literally thought that I was too dangerous to be outside because of the books. There was still no evidence against me. There was still no clarification about what crime I committed. And at the end of the day, the 3 judges decided to send me back to prison.
This wasn't even to determine if he was guilty or innocent. It was just to recommend that he come out of prison until he's found guilty. You know, innocent until proven guilty. But no, the judges made him go back to prison and wait for his trial.
And then 3 weeks later, we asked for bail because Ecuador has this law that you have to be able to get out of prison on bail unless your crime has more than 5 years of punishment, which mine didn't. My punishment would have been 3 to 5 years in total, according to what they were accusing me of, this attack against the integrity of computer systems. And if you have committed a crime against minors or against family members, then you can't get bail. And if you try to do money laundering, you can't get bail. But everyone else has the right to get bail. And the only question for the judge would be, okay, how big the bail should be. So we went in front of this judge, and once again, I had hope because my lawyer told me, like, legally speaking, there's no way they can deny this. At this point, they didn't take me to the courtroom. Instead, I was forced to do it from the prison, and they did it in such a way that there was no media allowed or anything like that. So at this point, they were trying to hide the whole stuff. And basically, what happened was that the judge, she denied the request for bail, but the reason was very interesting. She said, because the bail has to be proportionate to the amount of victims. But what she said is because the prosecutor hasn't defined what the crime is, she can't know who the victims are. And because she can't know who the victims are, she has no way of setting the bail amount. And for that reason, there was no possibility for me to get bail.
Wow, that is wild. That even the judge doesn't know who you've wronged.
Exactly.
Like,
I'm in the country of insane troll logic at this point.
okay, what do you? Okay, but that's one thing. It's insane. But there's another thing that I think is a clue here. Of like, wait a minute. Even the judge doesn't know what I've done.
Exactly.
This is a tell. This is a tell of some kind. This tells me that they're not just keeping it secret from me, but they're keeping it secret from other people. And what's the reason for that? Like, you must have thought of that.
Well, actually, what I was thinking and what we were all thinking is that they didn't have a crime. They thought that they would be able to arrest me and that they would be able to find something later, but they didn't find something, and that's why they couldn't actually go forward.
This is even more frustrating now. He's been arrested for some strange unknown reason, maybe only because he knows Julian Assange. And to think about sitting in prison without actually committing a crime, the prosecutor said that he was in trouble for an assault on the integrity of computer systems, but they didn't list a victim or show any evidence to prove that he's done such a thing. It's almost like they made up some crime to try to pin that on him later. And at this point, he's been in prison for months.
So anyway, what ended up happening is that we did the final recourse, which is a constitutional recourse called habeas corpus.
Oh, nice. Yeah, habeas corpus is the perfect tool here. It's a constitutional right that protects people who got arrested to challenge the court by saying, if I've committed a crime, I demand you show me proof. And if they can't show proof, then you can say your rights have been violated and they could potentially let you go.
So we got in front of 3 judges once again on the 20th of June, and we presented the information about what had happened when I was arrested.
His lawyer listed all the violations that took place during his arrest, and there were dozens of them. Cops didn't identify themselves. They didn't say what he was charged with. They illegally broke into his apartment and seized his luggage. They didn't tell the Swedish embassy within the 24-hour window, and they wouldn't let him have access to his lawyer, and dozens more violations of his rights.
And finally, we actually won that one, but they sent me back to prison because it's a bureaucracy, and you have to follow the bureaucracy, all the rules of the bureaucracy, and all that stuff. So I was sent back to prison. Okay, I won, but I'm still in prison. But then a few hours later, like at 10, 11 in the evening, my lawyers had managed to convince the judges to issue an order to immediately release me. And at that point, I came out, and my friends had organized bodyguards because they were being followed by people. So we got into a car. I had bodyguards, and suddenly I was out, and I can't even describe. Like, it was a very weird feeling being outside after 70 days of being stuck in prison.
Okay, he's finally let out of prison, but he's still facing trial. He still has to go to court and plead his side to see if they think he's guilty or innocent.
But the case didn't go away because even though they violated my rights, habeas corpus is just about fixing the immediate problem. The immediate problem was that I was in prison. So because they violated my rights when they arrested me, they let me go. But it didn't have an impact on the rest of the process. So the process continued.
So he's got some rules he has to follow. 1, he can't leave the country. Which, okay, he's facing legal issues. I can see that. 2, he's not allowed to have a bank account. And 3, he has to check in with the prosecutor's office every week to show he's cooperating with authorities. Like, physically show up and check in. And he's still baffled at what's all this about. He hasn't done anything illegal, so he knows they're not going to find any crime that he's committed. But at the same time, it's super scary to face charges when the government is dead set on finding some crime that you've done. And why are they dead set on sending him to prison? It's all a mystery to him.
While I was still in prison, the U.S. sent an official request to interview me. So we said, sure, following the Ecuadorian rules, we're fine. But the U.S. withdrew their request. But over the years, I have received notifications from Google. I've received notifications from Automatic, the WordPress company. I've received notifications from Apple. I don't think I've received notifications from Meta. So those 3 companies, at least, gave information to the FBI and to DOJ about my accounts. So somewhere in the background, there is a U.S. presence, but we still don't know exactly why.
Man, what is happening? Why are there multiple countries investigating him now? And keep in mind, the Ecuadorian authorities never gave him back his phone or computers, even after being let out of prison.
They took all of that from me on the airport. They took everything I had, except for the clothes I was wearing. So including, I mean, I'm one of those weird people that I have USB drives and YubiKeys around my neck, and they took all of that stuff. But since I have good password practices, none of that stuff was enough for them to get into any of my devices.
In 2019, what were you doing there to keep safe, right? So you had YubiKey, that's 2-factor authentication, the USB drives around your neck. How are those encrypted?
Most of them were Tails drives with persistent modules because I was using Tails a lot for high-sensitive stuff.
Tails is a version of the Linux operating system, which is a total amnesiac. It's built so that when you reboot, everything you did gets erased. It's made for extra sensitive operations or for those who have very strict privacy practices.
For the regular computers, I was mostly using Debian versions, and I was using just standard Lux for the hard drives. So it wasn't anything advanced. I mean, basically, my passwords are composed of stuff from the YubiKey, composed of things that I have in my head, combined with that to make it stronger. And then I was just using KeyPass for everything else.
So you say that you were using Tails a lot for high-sensitive stuff. What was some of the high-sensitive stuff you were working on?
Well, a lot of that stuff had to do with, like, for example, I was talking to people all around the world, like Ben Greenwald, for example. I was in touch with him on and off because at one point we were in discussions for me to come in and look at the Snowden archives. That never ended up happening, but I was in contact with him, for example, and that's the kind of contact that I don't really want to do from a normal machine.
Well, his privacy practices all paid off big time because the Ecuadorian authorities couldn't get into anything, and the clock was ticking on them to find things too.
In general, the prosecutor and the defense only has 90 days to find evidence. In my case, it was extended to 120 days, and this time in August was like the last month, and when August was over, they wouldn't have any possibility of finding new evidence and adding new evidence to the process.
They were determined to find some evidence on him within the time period, but they were really struggling. They were desperately looking for something they could find on him to charge him with.
I have been surveilled by different parts of the government. They are always following me, sometimes on motorcycles, sometimes they are in cars with polarized windows and without the license plate. They have these very specific cars that are from the intelligence department of the judicial police here, and they keep following me.
He sent me photos that he's taken of people following him.
One of the pictures you can see is a picture of one of those cars with a guy pushing out and holding an antenna outside of the window, and this is one of those, like, I don't know, meter-long antennas, and this car with this antenna was standing outside of my home, pointing at my window for like 30 minutes. So they were trying to, I don't know what they were trying to do. The other thing that also happened was that in my apartment, I started seeing Wi-Fi networks with different strange names with my name in them. And I never use my own name in my Wi-Fi names. And they kept coming and going, and it's clear that the police were trying to convince me to connect to these open networks because they were the only networks that didn't have any password on them.
They were really determined to find something on him.
The thing is, they managed to get video recordings from the surveillance cameras inside of my building. So at some point when I was standing in front of an elevator, I put in my code. I didn't have a strong PIN code. It was just 8 digits. And the cameras inside of my building were apparently good enough that they could see the PIN code on my screen.
Wow. By looking at the security cameras from his apartment building, they figured out his PIN code on his phone. Man, I just got chills listening to that. Because now I'm realizing that I've unlocked my phone a million times in view of a security camera. Elevators often have cameras in them, and I pull out my phone in elevators.